Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on diversity in FinTech. My name is Sabetti, and I'm an associate at Fasken in Toronto, and I'm a member of our financial services practice group, where we work with clients from within the FinTech sector alongside our colleagues in the emerging technology group, as well as with large financial institutions. Thank you all for joining us today. We're thrilled to have you here with us for this panel discussion. Before we begin, I just have a few housekeeping notes, and then I'll introduce our speakers. In terms of housekeeping, during the webinar, if you have any questions, please type them into the chat box beside the video. We will have a Q&A after the panel discussion, and we'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can. If you require technical support, please click the tech support link, which is located under the question chat box. In terms of materials, the presenter bios from today's webinar can be accessed from the materials button under the video player. And now I'd like to introduce our speakers who we're lucky to have joining us here today. First up, we have Hanna Zaidi. Hanna is the Director of Regulatory Research and Development at Wealthsimple. She's also a board member of Open Banking Initiative Canada, a FinTech Fellow with On Deck, a mentor at New York Barclays FinTech Accelerator, and an advisor at Holt Accelerator. Hanna is also involved in a number of volunteer initiatives, including as a mentor with Girls in Tech, a nonprofit organization working on erasing the gender gap in tech. She was also recently recognized as the 2021 IT World Canada Top Women in FinTech honoree. Next up, we have Laviva Mazhar. Laviva is an investment associate at Luge Capital, where she, among other things, sources for new FinTech investment opportunities and helps develop the firm's investment thesis. Laviva is also involved with various organizations as an advisor, including Founder Institute, Front Row Ventures, and Holt Accelerator, just to name a few. She was selected to be on Innovate Finance's 2020 Women in FinTech Power List, and was also ranked on Canada's 2019 Top 50 Women in FinTech by Digital Finance Institute. And last but not least, my colleague Kate Grant will be moderating the discussion today. Kate is a business advisor in our Fasken Toronto office, and she works closely with our emerging technology group. Kate has a background in ecosystem development, strategy, venture capital, and innovation. And she has successfully helped build and grow early stage companies throughout her career. Kate is a leader in the FinTech ecosystem and is involved with various organizations as an advisor, including Holt Accelerator, Innovate Financial Health, Mars, Next AI, and more. Kate also works one-on-one with various early stage FinTech companies to help them scale and grow. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Kate to begin our panel discussion.
Great, thanks so much, Caitlin. Hi, Hanna. Hi, Laviva. Great to have you both here today. So why don't we jump into it? One thing I do want to note is please feel free to the audience to ask questions during this panel. We're going to try to answer as many of them as we can because this is such an important topic that we're talking about. And, you know, it's something that's been very relevant in the news and just generally, I think, you know, bringing more diversity and more women into just not only the FinTech ecosystem, but the tech ecosystem in general. So why don't we start from the beginning? I'd love to hear how you both entered this industry, and did you know you were going to enter this industry when you graduated? I always like to joke and say, I have a degree in literature. How I ended up here, no idea. Definitely was not in the life plan. So would love to hear from both your perspectives, you know, was this in the plan? Did you see yourselves coming here? And, you know, let's start from the beginning.
Yeah, I could answer this question first. So I definitely did not see myself ending up in the regulatory compliance type of world. I actually did my undergrad and master's in economics and was working as an economist for the Ontario Ministry of Finance for a bit. And that was my dream job at the time and what I envisioned for quite some time. So I definitely did not see myself ending up in this space, but part of my, I've actually changed industries 3 times because it's like a continuing journey. Every day I wake up and maybe today I want to be an astronaut, who knows. But I started off as an economist, realized it wasn't the right environment for me for the things I was looking for. And so I made the jump to banking, did the Big Five circuit for a couple of years, worked in like strategy and regulation and a couple things, and realized I wanted to be a lot closer to the product and the intersection between regulation and technology, and found my way in the fintech world, and can definitely see myself staying in this space for quite some time.
On my end, I did not know that I would be one in venture capital and second in fintech. Actually, much like Hanna, I was also in economics. When I came to Canada to study at McGill, I thought I would go into academia and pursue a PhD in economics and whatnot. And I think halfway through my degree, I realized I didn't really want that anymore. Added finance to my, degrees and whatnot, but even in my different kind of finance experiences at university, I didn't really feel like I was resonating well with anything. Except in my last semester, there was a venture capital course that was just introduced for the first time ever at McGill. And I thought that was really interesting because, you were not only evaluating, the financials of a business, but also the opportunity that a startup has ahead of them, and how to decide if it's a good investment opportunity or not. And then kind of ended up working in economic development for a bit, and didn't really feel like it was the right opportunity. So kind of like Hanna as well, I didn't feel like it was the right career path that I was looking for. And by chance came across this organization called First Capital Partners. Arguably probably one of the first investment firms in Canada that was actively and specifically investing in fintech. This is back in 2015, 2016. But they were actually co-creating a couple of startups themselves. And I thought that was really interesting. So, I kind of pursued that opportunity and ended up working there for a couple of years before joining Luge, and learned a lot from the investment side of things, but also the operating of early stage fintech startups and navigating the challenges, especially in the Canadian market. So to answer your question, Kate, no, I did not know I would be working in this field, but super grateful to be in this space for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And I will say to both of you, I would say economics a lot closer to fintech than literature. Like, I always like to say, if anyone's seen Avenue Q, there is a song called "What Do You Do with a Degree in English?" I am proof you can do something with a degree in English. So I think definitely a lot closer, and completely agree with both those sentiments that, it's such a great industry to be a part of. I would say people are very warm, they're very welcoming, and they're very open to asking questions and helping with that mentorship gap and making sure that people are actually brought into the room. So, throughout both of your careers, you've had experiences as operators as well as on the VC side. How do we ensure that people can actually break into these roles? How do we make sure that we're recruiting diverse candidates really across all job functions and ensure that we're seeing diversity represented at every level? I think sometimes there's an issue where we'll see a lot of entry-level positions being posted and filled by what you would call diverse candidates, but as you kind of go up that food chain in organizations, sometimes there's less diversity than we'd like to see around the table. So how can we ensure that these people are really breaking in, getting that mentorship, and really, ensuring that we're seeing this happen?
Yeah, I can answer that one first. I think you already partially addressed the issue. It's when you go up the funnel into more leadership positions, you tend to lack diversity. And it's a pretty well-known fact that diverse people will hire diverse candidates and sort of start to fill out that pipeline. And I think that the mentorship piece, being able to have a broader funnel of talent throughout the entire hierarchy, for lack of a better term, I think happens at the top. So if you're hiring diverse leaders with different backgrounds, ethnicities, etc., chances are they're going to be looking at a more diverse set of candidates themselves, because you don't have the same biases that you might in which we've seen sort of in the past. And so I think it really starts at the top.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I would say as an investor, at least at Luge, one of the things that's super important for us is diversity, but not just of, gender or race, but also just diversity of background, diversity of thought and experiences. We just actually had our annual general meeting, and our keynote speaker was Sukinder, who is the founder of the Board List, right? And super interesting organization. And I think Hannah's completely right. Like, it starts from the top, and it's not just at the executive level, but also at the board level. One of the things that we're trying to do with our portfolio companies is for seeking out diverse candidates for that board level as well, because they're ultimately the ones that are also guiding the executive team in a lot of cases, especially in the early stages. So yeah, it's definitely starts from the top. I would say also something that I just recently came across, because my sister graduated just now, and so she's looking for jobs, and so by way of that, I get to see job postings and whatnot. And one of the things I noticed is that there's enough studies that show that how you write a job description can also influence who actually applies for that, right? And I still see words like ninja and rockstar in job descriptions, which is crazy to me, because I've seen for the last couple of years researches that show that using words like that can actually discourage certain groups of candidates, including women. So it starts even from those little details of how you're presenting to the world your organization and the opportunities that you present. There's also this concept of sometimes when you are applying to a job and you go to the website of the organization and all the leaders are kind of homogeneous looking, like that can definitely discourage a candidate from applying. And so again, to go back to Hannah's point, I think it has to start from the leadership, and even the demonstration of that diversity is super important at that leadership level to encourage people to apply. And then the last thing that's kind of really interesting is this idea that our networks can often tend to be homogeneous as well in certain ways. If I go into my LinkedIn, probably most people are from the fintech space, right? That is a certain kind of homogeneity in terms of my network. And so when you are seeking candidates, making sure that you are going outside of your circle and trying to bring other people in, actively seeking out that diversity is super important, because if you don't, then chances are, even within your network, people that do apply or that you are able to recruit are of some level of, has some level of lack of diversity.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Hanna.
Yeah, no, I think Laviva, you definitely hit some really good points, especially around the job description piece. I've actually had a couple of years ago when I was recruiting, I actually had somebody reach out to me that was really interested in the role that I was recruiting for at the time, but said that they don't feel like they might be a fit based on some of the things that we said in like the required skills section and just the way it was drafted. And it happened to be a female. And after we had a conversation, I thought she was absolutely perfect for the role. And I strongly encouraged that she applied. And even throughout the entire application process and through our conversations, she was very hesitant. She didn't feel like she had the years of experience or the exact education or some of the direct experience. And I think that that is a huge barrier that tends to happen more, I think, with women who doubt themselves. And I think the piece on going to a company's website and seeing what the leadership looks like, people care about this now. Like, even for myself, I will not go to a company where I don't feel like there is a fair amount of representation of different groups at the table and in leadership roles, because it's already going to tell me, I'm going to make assumptions about what the culture is like there, and I probably don't want to work there.
Yeah, I 100% agree with both those points. And just to the job description point too, one, imposter syndrome among women is real. Like, raise your hand if you've ever had imposter syndrome. Yeah, and then I think too, like those job titles like ninja or unicorn, the issue with them, if you ever leave that company, and this has happened to me in my career, where I think I once had this title that was community ventures. again, no idea what that means. And when I went to go apply for other jobs, most recruiters would come back to me and say, I have no idea what you do. And I'd have to spend the first 20 minutes of the call really breaking down like, oh, I did this or I did that. And they're like, oh, okay, I understand you're a director of this. And I was like, yes, but sometimes in startup world, they give people funky titles. So I think, you know, that's something that I'm hoping is starting to shift away from a little bit, but I still see it as well. And I think, you know, having those conversations at the portfolio company level, or even just among your peers and saying, you know, maybe you don't want to call them a marketing ninja, maybe you want to call them a marketing manager, bracket, something fun. In a position I was in most recently, I was director of FinTech, chief coffee officer, because I made the best coffee at the office, apparently. I think too, like with FinTech, one of the things that we really see is it can be a very intimidating industry. There is a lot of regulation, a lot of complex infrastructure. And I think too, like I always like to tell people, if we can acronym it in FinTech, you better believe we're going to acronym it. Same thing goes with venture capital, I think too. Like EBITDA, it's my favorite one. So how do you think that people that, you know, are really interested in entering the sector, but might be intimidated, can kind of enter it and can kind of start looking for that mentorship and figuring it out? I would say my first week working in VC, I sat there with my computer, and every time someone said something, I'd like quickly Google it, because I was a little bit afraid to ask the question, because I was afraid that people were going to be like, oh, we made a mistake, you don't actually belong here. So I'd love to get both of your opinions on that.
I can speak specifically to the mentorship point, and I'll say that I personally feel that we actually don't seek out mentorship enough, and we also don't give mentorship enough. I don't know, that's just from my personal experience, and you know, in my kind of bubble, what I see is that we're so busy in the startup space executing and hitting your milestones as a startup, but also on the VC side, you're constantly dealing with 100 startups reaching out to you, you know, managing expectations and stuff like that. And I find that one, you know, when I first started in the VC space, you know, a couple of years ago, I would actually actively seek out mentorship from more senior roles, but I kind of don't do that enough anymore, you know. And then of course, some mentors happen by structure. So David, who's you know, the general partner that I work with the most at Luge, he's been a great mentor to me. But it's also because I kind of report to him and we work together and stuff, right? But I should be proactively seeking out mentorship much more than I do. But also, like, I should be giving more mentorship as well to, you know, so many people reaching out on LinkedIn. And, you know, I'll take out my time with a couple of people, but not always. So I think we need to do that more. The other thing that I think when I was younger, what I used to think is I need female mentors. And the issue with that was that there weren't enough female role models, especially in VC, also in FinTech. Now, you know, it's starting to change a little bit, but I think we're still far away from where it should be. But, you know, some of my, you know, best mentors have been men, and that's okay as well. I think initially I thought I could relate more to women, and of course that would be the case, but that doesn't mean you need to shut down, you know, seeking mentorship from role models that are not women, you know.
Yeah, I think I think the culture of mentorship and being open to it, like Laviva said, I think it's something that I've had to think about a lot recently. And I noticed that, you know, generally when you're a first generation immigrant kid, you don't have that network. Your parents don't have that network. And it's really challenging because you'll see your peers that either grew up here or, you know, white kids, for a lack of a better term, who have these like strong support networks. You know, they have successful family friends or an uncle who's like in banking, or maybe a cousin in FinTech or whatever industry you're interested in. And they have people that they can go to and like mentor and ask questions. But when you don't grow up with that existing network and you have to start from scratch, it's really daunting. And this idea of mentorship and finding that is a bit of a culture change. And it was definitely not something that I had growing up. It was really hard for me to even get my first job back when I was a teenager. And I consistently saw this as a challenge, you know, as I was growing up and going through my career. And it wasn't until later on when I had the opportunity and platform to be able to give back or pay it forward, I made it a point to be able to mentor women, people of color, and different diverse backgrounds. I made a post about it last year, especially during the beginning of the pandemic on my LinkedIn around this point. And there was and just opening up my time, added a Calendly link, and whoever wants advice on how to break into fintech or financial services, like, let me know. And I specifically want to talk to like women and people of color. And the outpouring was absolutely insane, where people had the same experience. Like, they have no one in their network or their inner circle that they can go to and feel comfortable approaching people. And so it's really hard to even break that barrier. And so I think that's extremely important, that we think about these things mindfully, that this idea of mentorship is even something that people feel is unattainable or not something accessible to them.
For sure.
I couldn't agree more. I had the same experience, you know, moving here when I was 18, and didn't, you know, my network is basically other international students from McGill, who also didn't have a network here. So I totally, you know, relate with that lack of that, you know, that I guess network and access that you're born into, kind of thing, in this context. But yeah, sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to say that I really relate to that.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think there's always that sentiment. People are like, oh, your net worth is your network. If you don't have that base to start with, that can be really tricky. And I love that idea of doing a Calendly link. I know someone on our team recently did that for Black founders specifically that were looking to break into law. And I mean, I've always valued both internal mentors as well as external mentors, because sometimes it can be really tricky to go to your boss and say, my boss is really like sucking right now. And it's like kind of creating that feedback loop. I'm a big fan of radical candor, where just being very, you know, upfront and be like, you're not doing this correctly, and this is how we need to move forward with it. But it can be difficult, especially for people when they're junior entering their career, that maybe don't understand how to give somebody feedback correctly, because they're afraid, I'm going to lose my job, I'm going to be punished for this, a whole gamut of reasons. So I think this actually kind of really brings us into our next topic we want to discuss is, within fintech, there might not always be a clear path forward for women and diverse people in this field. Again, lack of mentorship, which we sort of talked about, and, you know, how can we create this network, and how can we ensure that these individuals are being promoted to leadership positions? Because I mean, it's happened to me in my career, where somebody that joined a company after me was all of a sudden made my boss, and I can't figure out why. And you kind of quickly start cluing in, oh, they're a white male, and the person above them is a white male, and they're looking at me and saying, you potentially could be a risk here. You potentially could go off and get married and just leave, or whatever that situation is, which actually did happen to me once at a company, where they said I was a flight risk because I was a woman of a certain age. But would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Dear God, to the flight risk comment. People still think like that. It's
100%.
crazy. Yeah, no, I know they do. It's crazy to hear it sometimes. I think this one is a bit tricky to answer, because I feel like the conversation tends to get degraded a little bit around, well, you know, we need to hire diverse candidates for the sake of diversity. And I always find that to be a very damaging lens to the conversation, because it actually takes away from the main goal that we're trying to achieve here, which is, again, like, I don't want to make the business case for diversity. I think that conversation has been beaten to death, but there are returns on investment when you have more diverse thinking at the table with different experiences that can think about product opportunities within like a fintech product and reach new markets, for example, that typically were underserved or completely unserved. The user experience, like, there's so many, you know, positive. I can see this in my day-to-day. We have a fantastic user experience research team at Wealthsimple, for example. and having like diverse researchers who come from different backgrounds and experiences question, you know, how we're positioning a product or who we're targeting or how it's designed and whether it's accessible, is then able to reach a broader audience, and that matters, and it is a positive impact to our bottom line. So I think recently we saw this comment by, I think it was like Snowflake CEO that did like the media circuit, I think it was like a week or two ago, where it's like, you know, behind closed doors, we all know that you know, hiring for the sake of diversity is problematic and no one actually wants to do that, something along those lines. And I think that's exactly this like misconception around this concept that I find really painful to deal with, like that we're still here, we're still having that conversation, and people still think this way that are in, you know, very powerful positions across the board. And yeah, I think it's there's clearly a lot more work that needs to be done around the discourse around this. And again, going back to my earlier comment, like we need to have diverse leaders in order to have that element of mentorship, have that pipeline be filled up with a diverse set of candidates, etc.
Yeah, I was in shock when I read that comment about the CEO of Snowflake. I think one of the things that I've learned personally is also just kind of having an open conversation with at least your whoever you're reporting to and whatnot. So I remember, and this was one of the kind of, I guess, quote unquote, defining moments in my early career was at my last firm. I remember, you know, one of the partners, we were working on a deal, and one of the partners specifically said, I want you to work on this deal. And, you know, you will be kind of in charge of taking the transaction from start to finish. I had never done that before. And I was already, you know, juggling a bunch of other projects. And I kind of, you know, for like at the team meeting, I kind of hesitated, and it was because I was questioning if I would be able to do a good job. Rather than thinking, oh, this is an interesting challenge and I will have access to support if I hit a wall. So my immediate reaction was, oh, I'm not sure. But then I realized later, shit, I should have just taken it up for the challenge, because I'm pretty sure my male counterpart, and I did have one who's awesome, but he would have just taken it up and ran with it, right? So then I actually asked the partner to go for a coffee with me that afternoon, and I explained to him, look, I think that was a knee-jerk reaction, but you know, that's kind of common. I'm also, you know, just getting started in my career. I was kind of scared. And he was like super aware of, you know, some of these, I guess, imposter syndrome that Kate, you mentioned. And he actually was telling me, yeah, I know that a lot of women actually question, you know, if they can actually get something done, or that imposter syndrome thing. So yeah, no worries, you are going to run with it. And for me, that was so, you know, I kind of pat myself on my back a little bit for actually realizing it immediately and then addressing it. And then, you know, having open conversations with your superior about if you do want to move up, you know, asking, okay, how can we get there? And if they come back with, you know, feedback, take it. And if you don't believe that you're being assessed fairly, then having a conversation about that as well. But I think even just expressing that, yes, you want to move up, and how can I get there? At least that way they will have you top of mind, and, you know, try to at least consider you for a role, for a promotional role.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I find within companies too, you sometimes really need to be your own advocate. Nobody is going to advocate for you to get that promotion, to take the lead on something. And it can be very difficult to have those conversations. I know early in my career, I was like, I'm just going to sit here, I'm going to do hard work, and they're going to recognize it. The truth is, they're not. Nobody's going to recognize it. I mean, yes, you'll get rewarded for your hard work. Yes, people will see like, oh yeah, you're doing a really great job. However, unless you raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to be promoted to whatever that next level is, it's not necessarily going to happen. And I think too, like something that I can't remember where I read this, but something that I did read was, you know, with women, if they stay late and they work on projects or take those side of the desk projects on, it's kind of expected of them. Whereas if our male counterparts do it, they are seen as like, oh my God, you're going above and beyond, like praise be, which is, it's kind of a double-edged sword because, women often do fall into those roles of planning the office parties or being on whatever committee, or even just, raising their hand to say like, oh, I'll stay late and help this individual. And I think that's a great experience, Laviva, having that partner that really understood it and saw it. And, I think we're all in good positions within our roles where we do have those male counterparts that are going to lobby for us. And I can speak to my own team as well. They definitely give credit where credit's due, and we ensure that people's voices are heard around the table. One thing I always like to tell my interns and summer students and the Art Clean students here is you have a voice in this as well. So don't be shy to speak up and say, I think this, or you're wrong. I like to tell my team as well, like, I have ideas, not all of them are good ideas. If you think this is a bad idea, tell me before we go down that path. So I think it's something that, we definitely need to advocate for and see more of this mentorship happening.
I just want to add one point here. Sorry to cut you off.
There is.
One of the things that I found works well for me is, so at Luge, and it's going to sound super old school and rudimentary, but somehow it works, is we have this kind of annual evaluation thing, right? And we actually get an opportunity to self-evaluate as well. So it's not just your managing partners or general partners like evaluating your performance, but you actually get to you get to actually fill out the same form that they would be filling out, but separately. And that really gives me an opportunity to talk about those, special projects that I did or the extra stuff that I took on, just so that I can kind of remind them, yeah, like, don't forget that beginning of the year, I took on this responsibility and whatnot. And of course, I'm lucky in the sense that they are super, they see that as well. So I got lucky in that sense, of course. But I don't know, maybe if you're a company and if you do these annual evaluations, then give your employees an opportunity to evaluate themselves as well. And that could open up, a lot of things that they probably did, behind the scenes that you weren't even aware of.
Yeah, I really like that idea. My former fund did that as well, where we were able to give feedback. And then we also did circular feedback. So basically, I would grade our partners and say, this is where you let me down this year. This is what you didn't do to see me succeed. Or on the reverse, here's what you did to help me succeed. Like, I really appreciated that you did this for me or gave me this opportunity. So I think it's really important to build in within companies.
Yeah.
I've worked at a lot of early stage startups in my career, and I think reviews and feedback often just falls by the wayside, mostly because a lot of the companies may not have an HR person or may not have like a formalized process in place. And then B, it's kind of like, okay, we could take 20 minutes and do this, or we could have a client meeting and get sales in the pipeline. It's like sales are always going to win. Feedback reviews, they're like, second-class citizens almost.
I find that, when I was working with at FCP and the startups that we were building, what I started seeing is that as a startup goes from seed and past the Series A, one of the most important roles of a CEO is actually to HR, right? Recruiting the right talent and keeping them and introducing that, making sure that the culture is conducive so that, it's diverse and it's inclusive and of course that everybody is able to have a safe environment that they can speak in. And I think, when people make an organization and the caliber of your people and whether or not they're happy and satisfied somewhere, I think that's super important in driving the culture as well. I really think that that's one of the most important jobs of a CEO besides fundraising, of course, and heading up a company and direction. But yeah, like HR for me is one of the most important things.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think too, like having HR as a leadership role in those early stages just makes a ton of sense. And I have a bunch of friends who are in tech recruiting and tech HR, and it's not a role that should really fall to like the executive assistant or the office manager, because they can deal with the day-to-day like payroll things and setting up people on their insurance plans, but they really need to have that guiding voice. And I think, I don't know if either of you have read, Michael Litt, who's the founder of Vidyard, wrote a couple of years ago this article called We Accidentally Created a Bro Culture and Now We're Undoing It. And what I love about that article is he's like, when we started this company, we were 6 people, all of us were men pretty much. And then we hired our first woman. And the first question she asked us in the job interview was, well, what's your maternity policy? And they were like, none. We haven't come across this. And I think this happens that, founders, especially in those early stages, when they do that leap from pre-seed, seed, series A, they're like, oh my gosh, we now have to worry about maternity policies. We now have to worry about paternal leave even. And they don't have that stuff baked in when you're, 3 founders, because you just don't think of it. So having HR in leadership, to me, is just sort of a bit of a no-brainer, and being able to push for that and create things such as KPIs, OKRs for the team. I'm a big fan of OKRs, so I think they do really help. I just want to remind people too that we are going to have some chat at the end, but if people want to throw some questions in the chat, or there's a Q&A feature, please feel free to. Would love to get the audience involved and kind of hear some questions from you folks as well. Anything that's burning on your mind. Alrighty, let's move on to our next question here. And I think, this has been talked about a lot in the media, but in STEAM fields, we frequently see women deciding to leave this sector, really for a variety of reasons. It could be from company culture, no upwards momentum, that feeling of imposter syndrome, or no support at leadership levels. And then, there's also personal reasons too. I think it's been shown that women often take on caregiver roles for family. They're often the ones that maybe have to do other extracurriculars with kids or other things. And I think it's changing a little bit. You definitely see, when I was a kid, you saw a lot more moms at the soccer field than dads. And I think it is starting to change, but the change isn't happening fast enough. And according to a study by the National Science Foundation in the US, only 38% of women who have a degree in computer science are actually working in STEAM fields, compared to 58% of men. And we're seeing this happen in fields as engineering as well, where there's really only 24% of an attrition rate. And they often label this the leaky pipeline, which basically means women are either just not entering these roles for whatever reason, or they're deciding to leave these roles. So how can we make sure that women are encouraged to stay around the table? And, if they are graduating with an engineering or any other kind of STEAM degree, that they're entering these fields and they're staying in these fields and they're kind of getting that upward momentum. I know we've talked a little bit about mentorship, but would be curious to know, what other ways can we start helping, tape up this leaky pipe?
I have seen quite a bit of women leave that are in engineering or technical roles, leave toxic environments where they felt like it just wasn't safe for them to speak up, or they didn't feel like they were being heard. I think there is definitely a leaky pipe issue for sure. And I don't know if they actually leave the field or the industry altogether, or they just leave the companies and cultures that just don't align with what it is that they're looking for. And I think going back to earlier conversations around, having imposter syndrome, but then the flip side is you do all the work and it's still not enough. It's still not recognized because it's not the same people that you're used to recognizing, promoting, putting in leadership positions, or moving along. And, I think I'm fortunate in the specific segment in the FinTech space that I particularly have not experienced this issue myself. I've seen it. I haven't experienced it myself, but I have seen a lot of my female colleagues in various companies experience this issue where they felt like it was just very toxic and they had to leave, and it just wasn't good for their mental health. And that's really unfortunate because these are companies and products that are widely used, and you're missing this key talent just because of the cultural issues that you're failing to address?
I'd say also from a startup perspective, where you're often pulling a lot of hours, you're working weekends. Sometimes the perception, and I mean, part of it is reality, is that we are looking for diversity and inclusion, but we're not super successfully providing an equitable work environment. If you think about, Kate, you were talking about mat leaves and just being a mother, right? Or being a caregiver and whatnot. I think it needs to be normalized where, let's say you are a female CEO and you need to go on maternity leave, it should be okay, right? If we can't expect diversity without providing the right work environment, the flexibility, and the safety of working environment where these talents stay. So I think one is companies need to do a better job at making that work environment flexible and equitable for different people with different walks of life. And I think the other part is also perception, and this idea that like for even for candidates to be able to see that, yeah, there are certain companies that are providing that flexibility, that needs to be communicated, that kind of culture needs to be communicated enough to their candidates. And people need to ask questions like what you were saying about maternity leave, and somebody asked, the sixth person who was hired asked, what is your policy? We need to ask those questions because it's a part of our lives. It's a lot of people's lives, and these are life goals that you should not have to hold up because you want to work at a startup or you want to work at in tech.
For sure. And I think that does make a big difference is, thinking about it. The founder of Sampler actually wrote a really great blog post. She took a maternity leave and, just talked about it openly and said, like, I'm taking time off. This is, I only get to have a kid once, maybe twice. I want to have that bonding time, and I'm going to entrust that my team is going to hold down the fort. And if it's an emergency, they're going to pick up the phone and call me. They're not going to send a text. Well, maybe they'll send a text, but they're not going to send an email, right? They're going to pick up that phone and say, hey, we need 5 minutes of your time. And I think, setting that precedent and talking about it really does help within the ecosystem. And, I always encourage when I talk to male CEOs, especially as I like to jokingly refer to them as the old male, pale and stale, have those conversations and talk to other people. Like, don't just talk to your founding team. Go and talk to other people in the industry. Go and talk to people that have done it before and say, like, what really helped you build success? What really helped you get diverse candidates into that workflow? And to make sure that, they are a little bit supported here and that they are going to achieve goals. Because the worst thing that can happen is you look around the table and you see clones of yourself, because then you're not going to get feedback. You're not going to get different points of view. And you're just going to have people potentially parroting what you're saying because you don't have differently lived experiences.
So I just want to add, it doesn't only, it's not only with female candidates. My partner, he is from Bangladesh, as am I, and he had several family emergencies over the last couple of years, and his work, was flexible enough to let him go and work from there, right? And obviously with COVID, that is, we've learned that working from home actually works, and sometimes we're actually more productive and whatnot. But I think even understanding that, yeah, if you have an immigrant, talent in your team, you need to, like, it's not the same. We don't see our families every other weekend. It's once a year, once 2 years, and just being able to provide some flexibility so that maybe they can go and work from there for a couple of weeks. Like, I think, that kind of environment needs to come, again, as Hanna said at the very beginning, it needs to come from the top. And you need to realize that if you want those diverse candidates, you need to provide that environment for them to thrive.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I mean, my family is not all the way in Bangladesh. They are 5 hours away though. And which does not sound, it's not an international flight, but it's not a day trip. And I've always strived to work for companies that I can say, you know what, I'm going to go work from there for a week or something. I'm still on the same time zone. I'm still available. I'm just not physically at my desk. And I think COVID has really taught us that people can be in different places and still be just as effective. You don't need to be, chained to that desk 9 to 5. You can work flexible hours, you can work flexible schedules. And personally, coming from tech, I find that's been really beneficial to me in my career, because it's just helped kind of really flow, how I'm able to work when I work best. I am not a morning person. If you, email me at 8 a.m., you're probably going to get a grumpy response. And it's just, a fact of life. And I think we're learning that. I know we're coming up on time very quickly, but I do want to answer a couple of questions. The first one being, we often see ex-banking employees want to join startups. And I personally get emails from people that are working at the bank or are within the financial services ecosystem that want to make that leap into fintech, but are afraid because they don't have any technical background. They've worked in various industries that, they maybe won't understand what the developers are talking about. And they understand the fin part of fintech, but they might be a little afraid of the tech part of fintech. So how can we bring these people into the room, and how can we ensure that they're feeling comfortable with applying for these roles?
Yeah, I can speak to that. I've made the jump as like a banker to fintech myself, and each time I changed careers, I had to reposition the narrative and the value add that I brought to the table in a way that obviously made sense to the audience that I was talking about. And I think the fintech space, there's a lot of non-technical, non-engineering roles. Obviously, I think we're fairly aware of that. I work in like the regulatory strategy team. I'm also not a lawyer either. So, it's sort of like an ex-economist working in this space. So I probably have imposter syndrome from multiple fronts. But I think that one thing that we've really realized is some of the most successful people that work in tech tend to be people who've had like very varying past experiences and backgrounds, people who've had, a different career and have transitioned because they're bringing a layered lens to a problem. On the banking side, one thing I say, especially in like the regulatory team, is working at a fintech, chances are most people outside of the reg team or the operations team tend to be people from tech. So, they've worked at maybe Google or Amazon or Shopify or whatever. They haven't worked in financial services. So as great as that is, because we're not trying to recreate the wheel, like we're really a challenger to the, incumbent ecosystem. On the flip side, you also, it's useful to know how things work under the hood. For example, how do you process a payment, and how do these things actually work, and what are the rules around them? And typically somebody that has worked at a bank, for example, and has had the right experience and is somebody who is very eager to learn and is able to provide that guidance, right? And that insight that typically doesn't exist. And I think the other piece is there's a lot of transferable skills that you do get depending on your role, obviously. If you have technical data analysis skills, you've done executive level presentations, you've done project management, maybe you've worked in business operations, like those are very transferable skills to a fintech ecosystem on top of the industry knowledge that you have. So again, also depends on how you tell your story, because I think the flip side is, I think people who think they've worked in financial services think that they'd be a good fit for a fintech, which isn't always the case. Like there is a significant culture change from the two environments. Things move a lot faster. The life cycle of a product, the product development life cycle at a bank can be years, where at a fintech can be weeks or months. And you need to like move accordingly and be able to solve problems really quickly and be very analytical. And so I think the other piece of it that I tell people is you have to be really honest about like what you bring to the table, but there's plenty of opportunity in this space. So it's how you tell your story.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, I worked in the very early days at Wave Accounting, and all of our customer success people that we hired had either worked at small businesses or really understood that space. They maybe worked retail, and they learned it as they went. And I would say the best thing that happened to me there is one of the developers took me aside one day and said, I'm going to teach you the very, very basics of the code we're writing. And that way you'll understand what we're asking for. And that way you can relay any feedback you get. I was on the marketing side, from clients or from people that you're talking to about our product, be able to say, okay, I understand how the back end works enough to be dangerous. And now I know when I go to our developers, this is something that is going to take 5 minutes, or this is something that's going to take 5 weeks and we need to put it in priority backlog. And I found just kind of that like internal mentorship, share of information was invaluable. I know we're almost at time here, so I just want to thank you both for joining me today. Would love to hear any closing thoughts, any closing things that you'd like to share with our audience. I work at a law firm. I almost said closing arguments. So limit yourself, Hanna. I am not a lawyer, yet I work at a law firm. So would love to hear any kind of words of wisdom that you have to share.
Mine is super simple. I think something that always worked for me in my career and also just in my life is don't be afraid to take risks. Obviously, it's coming from the venture capitalist, so there's no surprise there. But I've whenever there's a big decision ahead of me, whether it's in my personal life or career-wise, I try to get my gut feel first, and then I go and talk to a couple of people that I trust within my family, friends, network, colleagues, and whatnot. And I don't know, every time I've taken a risk, it's always been worthwhile. So yeah, I would just say don't be afraid to take risks. I know it's super basic, but it works.
No, I have to completely agree with Laviva. I've changed industries 3 times. It was a gamble every single time. I think like I constantly, if I doubt myself, I ask myself like, well, what a white guy do? And then all my fears are dispelled and I just go for it, and it usually works for me. So yeah, that's usually the mentality, is take risks. It'll likely pay off, and sometimes it won't, but like you'll always get back on your feet.
Yeah, I think those are both great words of wisdom, and go for that moonshot. I once made a cross stitch for a girlfriend of mine that said, walk into the room like a white man would. And it's like, yeah, it kind of adds up. Well, I want to thank you both for coming today. I want to thank our audience for being here as well. I think we had some great discussions, some great takeaways, and I'm going to pass it over to Felicia to close us out today.
Thank you, Kate. Hi, everyone. I'm Felicia. I'm a business lawyer at the Montreal office. I would like to thank all participants for attending this panel. Thank you, Kate, for being an excellent moderator. And most of all, a huge thank you to our 2 panelists, Hanna and Laviva, for taking the time today to address the topic of diversity in FinTech and being so generous in their interventions. One item that really resonated with me was their point on making mentorship accessible to individuals from a diversity background. I think this is a very important element that can hopefully bring people that do not have a head start in the industry to the same level as their peers. Moving on, I invite you all to subscribe to our mailing list to hear about our next FinTech events and receive bulletin updates. At Fasken, we are a national team dedicated to FinTechs, providing knowledge and practical advice to our clients, helping them understand how to navigate the financial services regulatory environment and the emerging tech industry. Finally, I'd like to remind you that this webinar is recorded. You will be able to watch it again on our Fasken's website. On behalf of Fasken, thank you for attending this webinar. We wish you a wonderful day, and we hope to see you for our next event.